All right, welcome to the third hour of the Elias Macko Show on this Friday, our last show of the week. Now, over what has been nearly 2 weeks of fighting between Israel and Hamas, the countries surrounding the region find themselves on edge. Worries, of course, that the escalation of that war will spill over into neighboring territories and countries. In Lebanon, the impending threat of Hezbollah and what they might do. And I should just point out, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, according to the Canadian government. This is worrying people on the ground in Lebanon. And of course, for Quebec's Lebanese community, I should point this out, 78,000 people in Quebec, about half of those in Montreal, come from the Lebanese community. Let's go now to Beirut, where we find Marie-Joelle Zahar, a political science teacher at University of Montreal. Marie-Joelle, welcome to the program.
Hello, Elias.
What is the feeling right now, Marie-Joelle, in Beirut, in Lebanon?
I guess everyone's been waiting to see what developments are going to come about. There is concern and a lot of anxiety because what's been happening for 2 weeks in Gaza scares people. And obviously, there's a real risk of the conflict spilling over beyond Israel's borders.
So why would it spill over? Because I think this is where the Hezbollah comes into the conversation here. Let's get into that, because what are the fears on how and why this spills over the border?
I don't think that the fears are limited to what Hezbollah might or might not do. Hezbollah has been engaged in cross-border shelling and counter-shelling with the Israelis for 2 weeks. But one interesting thing to note is that the shelling has remained contained to the area in which the two parties had already been confronting each other at a lower intensity prior to events unfolding in Israel and in Gaza. Mm-hmm. Where I think that the spillover is of concern is in great part because there's a feeling in the region that Western governments, our governments, have actually provided a political cover to Israel, and that has actually spurred a number of groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, but others as well. There have been incidents in Yemen and in Iraq recently to actually take violent action against not just Israel and Israelis, but also against American and Western interests. American bases have been attacked in Iraq, and there's been an incident in Yemen as well. So there's a real concern that the spillover will not be limited to Lebanon if it happens, but will take over the entire Middle East.
Can you tell me what, one thing I try and find, I keep trying to find out more information. I find the information's murky at best. What is the type of support that Hezbollah has from, everyday citizens? Maybe we could expand upon this if, as in your role as a political science teacher at University of Montreal, what is the support from everyday citizens for Hamas in Gaza? Because I think this goes into this as well. Are these groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, do they have broad support, or is that exaggerated? Because I'd love to know more on that end.
So this is a complicated question to which there's no easy answer. Both Hamas and Hezbollah, in spite of the fact that they are designated terrorist organizations by our governments, are also political parties with elected officials. So, it's a Jekyll and Hyde situation where they actually do have support because of the role that they play in domestic politics, but there's also within the populations, both in Palestine and in Lebanon, people who actually take issue with some of their actions, particularly violent actions. Mm-hmm. So in Lebanon, Hezbollah is the main party representing the Shia community, which is by far the largest community in Lebanon nowadays, even though the country hasn't had, a real census for a very, very long time.
Uh-huh.
But these are not groups that one can simply dismiss as small, irrelevant factions. They are factions that have actually built a lot of legitimacy because of their very outspoken and sometimes violent defense of the interests of the communities that they represent.
And Marie-Joelle, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this because, as I mentioned off the top, there's so many people of Lebanese origin that live in Quebec and live in Montreal. I count some of them among my friends. And boy, depending on what community from in Lebanon they come from, I get differing opinions on the country. We talk about the demographics, and there hasn't been a census in a lot of time. I've seen some numbers. A third of the country is Christian, a third Shia Muslim, a third Sunni Muslim. On or about those figures, that's not precise. Does that change the perspective? Like, depending on what religious group faction you come from, does that change the perspective on this conflict in the region?
Again, a very good question, but not one with an easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that, for example, Lebanese of all confessions were very much supportive of Hezbollah in previous instances where it was seen as the only group, because the Lebanese army doesn't really have the same, unfortunately, strength that could stand up to Israel while the Israelis still controlled part of Lebanon. Now, after that, there was a shift in the opinion. And in 2006, there were a lot of people who were not comfortable with the fact that Hezbollah, through its actions, dragged Lebanon in its entirety in a confrontation with Israel. So it really depends. It depends also on people's own memories of events. Those who, like me, I'm not young anymore, have lived through multiple instances of confrontation between Israel and either Hezbollah or Palestinians earlier on during the civil war, often have in mind a concern about overreaction, collective punishment that does not distinguish necessarily between civilians and combatants. And therefore, we may have a very different and sometimes maybe more prudent and nuanced understanding or concern compared to young people who will position themselves more ideologically for or against what Hezbollah represents.
Marie-Joelle, a really fascinating discussion. I'm happy you got to join us today. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's Marie-Joelle Zahar, political science teacher at University de Montreal.